Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Transport Infrastructure Ireland, I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's Heritage Week talk with Rob Goodbody. Now, before we begin, a quick update about what TI is doing for this year's unusual Heritage Week. Firstly, I'm delighted to announce two new online initiatives. We've recently published a new resource of story maps on our website. These story maps combine the latest mapping technology, narrative text, images and multimedia content to allow you to explore the archaeology and heritage of our schemes in a new and innovative way. They've been produced in the main by the archaeological consultants who carried out the work, and I hope that you find them interesting and informative. Similarly, working with our colleagues in the Digital Repository of Ireland, the TI Digital Heritage Collections are now accessible through Europeana.eu. Europeana.eu is the European Union's cultural heritage portal, bringing together material from museums, galleries, libraries and archives right across Europe, and the abundance of this data and material will greatly enhance research projects into the future. We're also running a number of online events for Heritage Week. In partnership with the Roscommon Visitor Centre, Roscommon County Council and Archaeological Management Solutions, there are a series of daily lectures being run on the Roscommon Visitor Centre Facebook page outlining the ongoing archaeological works on the N5 Balladrine to Scramogue road project. Now, turning to today's webinar. It's a great pleasure to welcome Rob Goodbody of Historic Building Consultants. Rob has been involved in many of our projects and schemes over the past number of years as an architectural heritage consultant, contributing to numerous planning reports, EISs and environmental impact assessment reports. And today he's going to talk about how architectural heritage is considered and assessed on our projects. Rob is a graduate of Trinity College Dublin and has postgraduate diplomas from the Chelmer Institute, the IPA, UCC, TCD, with a Master's in Local History from NUI Maynooth and a Master's in Urban and Building Conservation from UCD. He initially started his career as a planner in London, returning to Dublin, where he subsequently became a Senior Executive Planner in Dublin City Council. Since the early 2000s, Rob has been working as an architectural heritage consultant with Historic Building Consultants. Rob has also published extensively on the subject of architectural heritage, including the Royal Irish Academy's Irish Historic Towns Atlas, number 26, Dublin from 1756 to 1847. So during today's talk, if you'd like to ask any questions, please use the question and answer facility on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can following Rob's talk. Now, without any further delay, I'd like to hand you over to Rob. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ronan, and good afternoon, everyone. The title, Making Omelettes, Minimising Egg Breaking, I thought summarises the process very well. It's when designing a new transportation route through the Irish countryside, let alone within cities, it's virtually impossible to avoid some impact on buildings or other structures that may have some architectural heritage value, however humble that might be. So the process needs to be able to determine how to select a route that will minimise that impact. Today, we will examine the processes that are gone through in order to determine the best route that would have the minimal adverse impacts. The procedure is highly regulated, taking into account a host of laws, regulations, standards and charters. In particular, the architectural heritage assessment is carried out in accordance with guidance in the architectural guidelines produced by the former National Roads Authority, and shortly to be replaced by a new set of guidelines to incorporate archaeology, architectural heritage and cultural heritage. Transport routes differ from projects such as gas pipelines, as it's possible to some degree to move a pipeline to avoid something of significance, whereas a road or light rail needs very gradual curves, and any attempt to move the alignment even slightly will have to begin and end some distance away from the obstacle that's to be avoided, and in doing so may have an adverse effect on some other feature. The design and assessment of a new road or light railway is a complex exercise, and the summary that I will give is a greatly simplified version. I'll explain each of these in greater detail as we go on, but for the moment I'll just list them and you'll get some idea from this the complexity of the task. The route corridor is chosen, it's assessed, the route options are chosen, and those are assessed. An emerging preferred route comes out from that, and that then goes to public consultation, and any submissions received are considered before that's amended into the preferred route, which produces the preliminary design, and on that preliminary design an environmental impact assessment is carried out. It should be borne in mind that the architectural heritage is only one of the topics examined in the assessment, and there are many others, including archaeology, ecology, noise, vibration, agriculture, hydrology, and more, not to mention the effect on human beings. So the route corridor, the designers decide where should be the furthest extents within which the new route should run. And that is what is known as the route corridor. So if we take a very diagrammatic example, those two lines maybe represent that route corridor. So each of the consultants would then examine this corridor and identify the constraints within it that would affect the alignment of the route. In the case of architectural heritage consultant, this includes the examination of written records to determine the locations of, say, protected structures, architectural conservation areas, buildings on the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, the domains of big houses, and industrial heritage. The stage at which each of these constraints is identified differs slightly between road projects and light rail projects, but that's a detail that won't concern us in this summary. So having received all this information from all the different disciplines, the designers then select route options. So if we think again of a diagrammatic examples, we'll maybe come up with 5 separate options for the route. And in each one of them, the designers are attempting to avoid all of the constraints identified by each of the disciplines involved. So at this stage, each of the consultants goes into further detail, looking more closely because there is definite lines now to work to, and so the site is visited to walk the routes of each of those, and this provides a great deal more detail. You might find examples like this one where the historical maps show us there was a domain of a big house, but that's utterly gone today, and even that side road leading off didn't exist back in historic times. So it's now entirely under farmland. The National Inventory of Architectural Heritage has carried out a nationwide survey of these domains to assess their current condition, but at this time the survey is based on maps and aerial photographs, and for most of the country has not included visits to each site. Visit will also show up the nature of buildings that might be on or close to the route selected, and that will give an idea of what architectural heritage value they may have and what kind of condition they might be in. The survey may come up with some things that are not shown in historical maps or even today's maps, such as perhaps a milestone found at the roadside. Street furniture is taken into account in urban areas, particularly in urban areas, to ensure that anything that of any architectural heritage significance is taken into account, including historic paving. Once all of the consultants have assessed the individual chosen routes, the designers then select from them the emerging preferred route. This might be this one in this case. So this one is known as the emerging preferred route, but this is not the final alignment, as the routes may still be tweaked to further reduce any adverse effects on architectural heritage or any other topic. In the example here, the route may be moved slightly to avoid one of those domains. At this stage, the details of the route are open to public consultation, and property owners, stakeholders, members of the public are able to submit their views and concerns about the proposals. These are taken into account where appropriate to modify the route. So from that, the route is tweaked and in this case we see it's been tweaked to avoid one of the historic domains. And this is now known as the preferred route. And once it's been determined by the designers, the architectural heritage consultant and the consultants for all the other disciplines will carry out the environmental impact assessment of the route. So the architectural heritage assessment at this stage will involve the consultant in getting more detailed information. In a very simplified form, this will involve a number of stages: returning to the site to survey it in more detail, carrying out consultations with stakeholders such as the conservation officers and the local authorities, with government department responsible for architectural heritage, and possibly with local historical societies and other groups. More detailed research would be carried out, including historical research, examine of historical maps, and ascertaining the relevant provisions of the local authority's development plan. Consultations with colleagues from other disciplines working on the project are also held, and because the other consultants' opinions may have implications for architectural heritage. So when that is all carried out, finally a chapter is written for the environmental impact assessment report. The site survey at this stage may show up more information that hasn't shown up to date. In this particular example, this picturesque bridge was to be directly affected by a road widening and needed to be examined. In fact, a closer examination showed that this is merely a concrete facade clad in stone. It was built in the 1960s when a previous road widening took place. And if looking through the arches of the bridge, the original 18th century bridge is visible, still there under the middle of the main road. Another example found on the site survey was this very finely built well with the steps going down in to get at the water supply deep underground. And that wasn't marked on maps either. Neither was this farm building with a very well carried out cut stone archway over the main access into the building. So all of this is found on the site surveys and can be taken into consideration. It's not just where buildings or other structures are directly affected that we need to take them into account, because where a building is of architectural heritage significance, the setting of the building will be of importance, and the potential impact of the project on that setting will need to be taken into consideration. So once all that background research is done, what's taken into account in assessing the impact on any particular building is the nature of the building or other structure, its significance to architectural heritage, its sensitivity to change, and the potential impact of the proposed road or light rail. The impact is considered to be direct, where it would involve demolition or damage to the structure, and indirect, where the character or setting of the building is affected. If any potential impact is identified, the report will recommend mitigation measures to minimise the effects as far as is possible, and this will be done in consultation with other specialists, such as those dealing with settlement, vibration, landscape, and others. So once the environmental impact assessment report has been compiled and all the maps, all the supporting documents are put together, they're submitted to Bord Pleanála as the authority that will be responsible for making a decision on the scheme. All documents are lodged there. The documents are made available to the public, and anyone has a right to make a submission to the board. After a time, the board may call an oral hearing, which will be held in public at a venue close to the proposed route. Eventually, after assessing all of the information, including objections, the board makes its decision and this can include the refusal of permission to construct the road or light rail, or it can impose conditions, even to the extent of refusing to allow part of the scheme to go ahead. So that's mitigation. Then I've mentioned as something that is where something is affected, you come up with proposals to try and mitigate that. So the protracted process of going through everything involving all the disciplines, government departments, the public and so forth, may still need some form of mitigation to be carried out. These will be identified in the environmental impact assessment report, and they must be implemented as part of the scheme. It's also possible that some measures can be introduced at construction phase due to positive changes in construction strategy. So if we go through some of the kinds of mitigation that would frequently be undertaken, first of all, is if you can avoid any damage at all, that's to be done as the preferred option, or at least minimizing it. So to give you some examples, this is an example of a disused derelict farmhouse and outbuildings that were affected by a road scheme. And at the construction stage, it was realized that although the farmhouse would have to go, part of the buildings could be retained, and this was done alongside the roadside. So for posterity, we have this part of this substantial farm building remaining there beside the road. In this other example, this disused railway bridge was affected, and when it came to construction, it was found that the approach roads would have to go, but the bridge itself could actually be retained and left there intact at the roadside. Sometimes repairs to structures adjacent to a scheme might be the option taken, such as this one, which is Muckla Gate at the Charleville domain in Tullamore, which was in very poor condition, and with the agreement of the landowner, that was refurbished under the auspices of Howley Hayes Architects. Sometimes a structure might be moved physically out of the way of the road or light rail, and this is possible in some cases. Most frequent and probably most obvious case is with gateways, which are frequently affected if a road is widened or realigned. This particular example was carefully photographed and recorded by measured drawings before being removed and relocated away from the road widening line. And there it is nearing the end of its reconstruction back from the road. This is another example from the Lewis Cross City light rail work, where the Lewis runs up what had been a disused railway cutting, but the railway cutting wasn't quite wide enough to facilitate two lines of the Lewis going through, and this wall, which had been built by the railway company in the 1850s, was in the way. So it was carefully recorded, detail was recorded, and it was taken down, and it was re-erected slightly further back from where it had been by heritage contractors specialising in this kind of work, and carried out under the to the method statements of Paul Arnold Architects. Milestones are an easy one. Once they're identified, they can be easily lifted and reinstated at the roadside as close to the original location as possible, but at a place that's in safety, where it's not likely to be hit in the event of any kind of collision. Temporary removal and storage is something that frequently has to be undertaken during these works. And this is always carried out with great care, ensuring that no damage occurs, and with labels to ensure that where any of these elements can be reinstated, that this is carried out correctly. Where items cannot be reinstated, such as granite curbing or stone sets that are not reused after the works, they are handed to the local authority for reuse elsewhere. This particular store is for the Lewis Cross City Works in Dublin. All heritage works for light rail are carried out by specialist heritage contractors who work only on heritage works. TII has a distinct heritage contract with this kind of work. Temporary removal and storage can include things like statues, such as Father Matthew and Thomas Moore, removed from the streets of Dublin temporarily, stored in a secure building, controlled and monitored for the safety and security of each of the items, with regular inspections and stored in purpose-designed and built cages. Then at the end of the project, when it was appropriate to do so, each of those was reinstated back in the streets of the city. If all else fails and it's not possible to avoid or move or even temporarily remove something and to be demolished for the road or rail project, it will be recorded in full before a demolition. This will involve a detailed photographic and written record with measured drawings. In many cases now, laser surveys are used to give a detailed record of a building or other structure for posterity. I'll give a few examples of this. In many cases, there are disused farm houses or farm outbuildings around the country that may be affected by a project such as these. And as with these particular ones here, they're photographed, measured, and a detailed report done up to record them for posterity as to how exactly they looked prior to demolition. This other example, these are gates that are actually moved and reinstated rather than permanently gone. But as with the other ones I mentioned, these gates were carefully photographed, measured and drawn prior to being dismantled and moved. So this is the drawing that was carried out for that particular gate, and it shows the gates as they were, not as they had been originally. So things like missing cast iron elements from here and there, that's recorded just as they were in reality. This is another building that was affected by a road line, and the detailed record of buildings can sometimes reveal information not previously known. In this particular case, this house was thatched originally, and it's very frequent that the thatch still remains underneath the corrugated iron put on at a later date. But in this particular case, the thatch had been removed, but the original roof structure still survived underneath, and it was not sawn timber. It was actually branches of trees cut to size and carefully assembled to form the framework for what originally was a thatched roof and was now a corrugated iron covering. Industrial heritage can be affected as well and will need to be recorded. In this particular case, a railway was affected by a road line, and so that had to be recorded before being lifted. In recording a rail line, the chairs, which are the cast iron fittings that hold down the rails, they usually had the name and date cast into them. So you can see in this particular case, GSWR 1917. So that's the Great Southern and Western Railway that built this particular line in 1917. Though looking at these chairs, you have to be very careful. They can be misleading because when track is moved, is lifted and replaced, they frequently reuse these chairs, and you can find them from all sorts of companies and all sorts of dates mixed up together. It just happened in this particular case that that one was from the original railway company and the correct date of 1917. Sometimes it's possible to glean information about a structure while it's being demolished. And in this particular case, it's a bridge that was demolished for the new N25 New Ross bypass, and the survey of the bridge beforehand determined that the bridge had been widened at some point in the past. So during the demolition, one side of it was taken down very carefully to work back and to reveal the original arches of the bridge that had been hidden since the bridge was widened, probably in the early 19th century. So that enabled that to be recorded before the rest of the bridge was removed. This particular example, again, buildings in the way of a road project. This is a derelict school that had closed in 1962 and had not been used since. And the buildings were a derelict of boys' school, girls' school, and a teacher's residence. So in this case, they were carefully measured and drawn for the record, and the drawings include detail of the, where appropriate, details of the curled barge boards on the edges of the buildings. The laser survey is a technique which is becoming more and more common now in recording buildings. It's a highly accurate and detailed method of recording a structure. Some of you may be familiar with a laser distance meter used for measuring distances if you're, say, doing up a drawing of a building. But laser survey uses the same technology, but automatically sprays a vast number of readings to an exceptional degree of accuracy and assembles the finished array, possibly involving millions of measurements of distance and angle, to produce an image of the structure that's being surveyed. When combined with the photographic image, the result is a very effective system for recording. When the measurements are taken from more than one location, a 3D image may be built up. And this is an example of a bridge in County Kerry on the N72 heading towards Killarney. And as you can see in this survey, every single stone is recorded in great detail. And so in this case, using measurements taken from a number of different angles, it allowed for a 3D image to be built up, looking through the arches over the top of the road, each individual arch. It's possible to look from any angle and to go in close up to the bridge to see individual stones. These can also, accurate measurements may be taken off the laser drawings, and so it is a very full and complete record that can be retained for posterity. This particular image should shortly start going alive and moving to show us the bridge from different angles. This bridge probably dates from the late 18th century, but it was, as often happens with bridges, there's a bend in the road which was obstructing traffic, and so the bridge needed to be taken down to reduce the bend on the road, to be able to widen the road and allow traffic to move more smoothly along the route. This is a very large file, which is probably why it's taking a while to open up. So there you can see it coming in closely from, you can see every individual stone, see the width of the parapets. And you can see the arches there, and underneath you can see a change in colour in there, as very often you'll find a seam part of the way through a bridge arch if the bridge has been widened at some time in the past. So finally, some oddities come up from time to time when surveying buildings prior to demolition for a road or a light rail scheme. In this example, a farm gateway in the Kilkenny countryside ran beneath a stone arch for no obvious reason. It was required that the gateway be recorded by measured drawings But to do this, it was necessary to remove the vegetation. Normally, the removal of ivy is a job that needs to be undertaken with care to ensure that no damage occurs to the masonry. In this instance, of course, the structure was to be demolished, and while it was necessary to minimize any damage, the long-term effects did not need to be taken into account. Once the ivy and brambles were gone, the structure looked even more unusual. And on top of the structure, the two parapet walls rising up had a distance of about a metre in between them. And it turned out that this was a footbridge just in the middle of the countryside for no obvious reason. An article in a local paper in the 1930s recorded that there were 3 of these bridges in the locality. And at the time, they had been a domain of a big house, and the 3 bridges were within that domain. The footbridges were built to allow the ladies in their fine dresses to cross over the farm tracks through the domain that were likely to be muddy. Originally, there would have been stone steps leading up on either side of the bridge, but these were gone before the survey was carried out. So, if we want to continue to provide new roads or improved roads or light railways, we'll have to continue to break the occasional egg. And it's up to the design team and the panel of experts working on the project to ensure that the damage is minimised. So thank you very much for your time, and we have answers at this stage.
Rob?
Yes, yep.
Yeah, that was great. Listen, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting and insightful talk. And you know, I think it really gave us a very good whistle-stop tour of the role of the architectural heritage consultant on our schemes, because it really is a topic that I think in the however many years of Heritage Week talks we've been doing, it probably hasn't been given as much of a hearing as some of the other aspects of cultural heritage. But there's been a good bit of interest in today's webinar, and we've had quite a few questions submitted through the Q&A facility. And actually, the most recent one was in relation to the that bridge in Kilkenny. What is the those parapet uprights? What is the what do you call those stones? What was the purpose of those stones on the parapets? They're quite unusual.
Purely decorative. You find it would be a variation on a theme you often find in roadsides where with walls built in the 19th century, either by the Congested Districts Board or whatever, where the capping on a wall as the stones are alternately sitting vertically and then horizontally. Mm. And in some bridges like that, you find all of the capping stones are vertical. But in that particular case, I think it was just purely a decorative feature, alternating horizontal and vertical stones.
Okay, very good. And another question here. Given your experience, could you reflect on some of the significant changes that you've noticed in the discipline over the past number of years?
Well, of course, the biggest change took place 20 years ago when new legislation came in under the what was then the Local Government Planning and Development Act 1999. It's now in the Planning and Development Act 2000, which brought in things like the concept of protected structures, which was a far stronger concept than previous listed buildings, brought in architectural conservation areas, and it really brought a more serious discipline to the whole of architectural heritage, which had been there before, but without without any proper legal backing for it. So that's been working on over the last 20 years, and it took a while before the number of protected structures around the country reflected the number that possibly should have been protected, but it got there, and that system is working very well. We've seen quite a lot of change in say the assessment of road schemes. The first one I worked on was 30 years ago, I think, when environmental impact assessments were required, but they were nothing like as stringent as they are today. It's great to see that everything is taken so much more seriously and carried out with the thoroughness that it wasn't going back in those times.
Okay, yeah, actually, just pick up a point there. A question came in here as well about the number of sites. You mentioned that there's been a change in the sites, and we have one sort of like, have you any sense of how many architectural sites there are in the country?
No, I don't think it's possible to. You can quantify the number of protected structures, but as you've seen of some of the photographs I had there, say for instance the disused house with the trees growing all out of it, that's not a protected structure. I don't think it ever would have been in its particular condition. But on the other hand, it is architectural heritage in that it was a 19th century farmhouse. Yeah. And and that's why it needed to be recorded. So we can tell those things that have been surveyed in surveys such as Record of Protected Structures or the National Inventory of Architecture Heritage. We can quantify those, but as for anything else, it's partly down to exactly how you define the dividing line between architectural heritage and things that are not of heritage value.
Oh yeah, I mean, and of course in there you also have the whole issue of when is something archaeological, when is something architectural. There's a lot of different, shall I say, overlaps and interactions. I actually have another question here on the, so on that point, what is the cutoff point, if any, for RPS and or NIAH sites? Or is there one?
Yeah, the Record Protected Structures, or RPS, has a legal foundation. So that is determined by each individual planning authority within its own area. And it's a very formalized process to get a building onto the Record of Protected Structures. And once it's there, it has a very strong legal protection. Any building that's not on that, but might be in the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, it doesn't have any statutory protection whatsoever. But having said that, once a survey is completed by the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, any building that is rated of regional significance or national or international significance, the minister concerned will write to the local authority and request those buildings be added to the Record of Protected Structures. Until that is done, they don't have any statutory protection. But in that way, it's a stepping stone towards a statutory protection.
Okay, and just on that, have we ever projects which go back to the drawing board? This question came in here just now. Go back to the drawing board when a feature isn't covered late on. For example, the footbridge.
Yeah, at that stage it's too late because that was only discovered at the point where everything had permissions had been granted for everything, and the project was ready to roll. Machinery was probably already rolling on part of this. So it is too late at that stage to do anything. Now, there could be theoretically a case where something monumental, it turns up of monumental importance, where questions need to be asked. But to my knowledge, that's never happened with architectural heritage. That if anything that had that kind of significance to bring the road to a halt, it should have been picked up beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, say it has, like we have had examples on the archaeological side of the house where significant miners come to light in the course of it, and that can have major impacts. Where you have to go back to the board.
The difference there mainly being that that kind of archaeology would have been concealed underground, and it maybe wouldn't have been found in a survey. Whereas with architectural heritage, by definition, it should be visible.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, say, like you referred to historical mapping there in your survey or in your talk, and the amount of resources that are there to place the structures that we have in the modern landscape in the historical context is so rich there. Like we've got everything from the down-surveyed maps in the 17th century, the Orden survey, and so on, that we're incredibly lucky to have these resources. I have two questions here in relation to the laser scanning. One is a comment. Lovely to see TII embracing ortho photography on point cloud data and our archives in this rich data. And another question coming in on the point is, following on from the laser scans you showed, do you think the pen and ink drawing is now redundant or obsolete?
It possibly is. I would be unhappy at it entirely disappearing. This actually brings me back to a question I was asked in the Viva for my undergraduate days, which was, has the aerial photograph, does the aerial photograph mean that maps are now obsolete? And I had quite an argument with the invigilator on that one, because I was saying no way. But yeah, in the case of laser survey, it could well render it obsolete, but I would be saddened because, well, partly because I started my career as a draftsman, but also I find in measuring up and drawing buildings, you personally are getting very close to them, and you can spot things that mightn't have been evident before you actually go in and start measuring directly face to face. And laser survey is just that bit more remote. And so it's, I think possibly it might replace drawings, but I hope that that won't happen for some time to come.
Yeah. Well, I think on the point, I'd be very cautious about about not recognizing some of the limitations of digital data in terms of preservation and ensuring security of the record. That you can very easily, digital data can be lost sometimes more easily than paper data, and you need strong security systems in place to ensure that that you don't just rely on it automatically. Oh, sorry, we've got something here in saying unhappy day. The ink and orthography or point cloud are friends in arms. They complement each other, and together are far more immersive. So I think it's a topic that we'll see ongoing. One thing that
put it better than I did.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, just another question coming here. Now we don't have too much time. With the just sort of looking into the future, how do you feel what you call it, architecture heritage and shall we say culture heritage in general is going to change, or what sort of developments do you expect to take place in the discipline over the next couple of years?
Yeah, there are changes. Well, where to start, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage is still going on, and once that's completed, that will be a fantastic resource, as it is already. I think there's greater public awareness, and that is growing, but also we're seeing a finer detail in what is now protected and what is considered worthy in some way. For instance, with the record of protected structures, there are far more recent buildings being added now, 20th century buildings added to the record of protected structures that might not have been appreciated 30 years ago, 50 years ago. We're also seeing more humble buildings coming in. Gone are the days when listed buildings as they were just the big houses and the Marion Squares and so forth. We're now seeing, because buildings, of course, went through the whole social strata, all different sizes, and smaller buildings may not have the same artistic value, but they still have they have social value and they have an architectural value. So we're seeing far more in protection of the what would have been considered lesser buildings now, and vernacular buildings is included in that.
Okay, well, look, I think we'll actually we'll finish up there. It's very, very informative, so, and it's given us a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much, Rob. For all of us this year, Heritage Week, no more than anything else, has been very, very unusual, and this year's Heritage Week has been very different from our previous year's Heritage Weeks. But I do think today's talk has been very successful, and it shows a sort of an interesting way in which we can present our work to the public in a new way. So just before I finish, I'd like to thank Rob again for being so generous with this time. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, in particular Shri, Lillian, Emer, Michael and James. And actually, Rob, could you just put the screen forward? Next slide, please. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'd just like to thank my colleagues there for all of their work in putting together today's session. We also have, I've highlighted a number of information for resources there. We've got a lot of information on our website, tii.ie/archaeology, which provide you links to our the DRI, the Digital Repository of Ireland collections. Also, as said at the outset, we're delighted that our material is now on Europeana.ie. And I've got I've just got a question in here, and it says, are TI lodging all of their historical surveys and findings with their archives? If so, it'd be super to see, I think, for the future generations. If somebody just wants to direct message me or even send me an email at ronan@ti.ie or archaeology@ti.ie, we'll follow up on that. We're certainly, our intention is that all of the material that we create in the course of our works, be it archaeological, architectural heritage, or anything else, does actually find itself into the permanent records. So sorry for that slight aside. But I say, if you want any further information, please contact us. And finally, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of Heritage Week. Thank you very much.